Lie number 11. We are winning the war on drugs. The war on drugs is a deceptive name for what has really become a war on the American people through the government's assault on human freedom, the prison system, and all taxpayers. Despite nearly 4 decades of battling against the use and selling of drugs, the government's so-called war on drugs, both at home and abroad, has largely been a failure. The tide of drugs imported into this country has not slowed, despite astronomical spending by the government and the imprisonment of record numbers of Americans, often for the possession of insignificant amounts of recreational drugs. Legislators, police, and prosecutors have encouraged judges to lock up more and more Americans, causing prisons to be bursting at the seams and ruining countless lives, a great many of them among racial minorities. The government lie is hardly new. In fact, the war on drugs is in effect a reincarnation of prohibition. The sale of all alcoholic beverages was outlawed in 1920 with the passage of the 18th Amendment. Closing the legal market on something that consumers desire simply opened up a black market, and in the 1920s there was a great deal of corruption and violence caused by the government's ban. It actually created the lawlessness that characterized the era. Consequently, gangs and organized crime flourished. By 1921, the murder rate in America jumped. After seemingly recognizing the harm that prohibition had caused, the United States enacted the 21st Amendment in 1933 to allow people to drink as they pleased. After prohibition was repealed, the homicide rate began to fall. This is not a coincidence. After the alcohol ban was repealed, much of the organized crime that was facilitated by prohibition simply switched businesses and entered into the illegal drug market. Today, several decades after the war on drugs commenced, the black market for drugs is thriving. The parallels between today's prohibition and yesterday's prohibition are glaringly obvious and point to the government's severe case of amnesia and to its Victorian attitude about our bodies, except that this time the stakes are higher. In our 21st century global economy, the violence is not confined to the U.S., it is worldwide. Ironically, in its metaphoric war on the use of drugs, the government has facilitated actual wars, actual violence, and actual death. It's about time that the government put its weapons and our cash down and began to use some common sense. The War on Taxpayers. Ethan Nadelmann has written extensively about the feudal war on drugs. He is a former Princeton University professor and is the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, an organization that promotes alternatives to the drug war. In one 2003 speech he stated, "We're a wealthy nation. If we want to lock up millions of our fellow citizens, we can afford to do that. On the other hand, our economy is not what it once was. In the 1990s, incarcerating millions of people was something we could afford. $10, $20, $30 billion, a drop in the bucket of the national economy. But now, we can no longer afford this failed war on drugs." If America could not afford a war on drugs in 2003 when Nadelmann wrote this, we certainly can't afford a war on drugs now with our ailing economy paired with ever-increasing government expenditures. Yet is the question really, can we afford it? Wouldn't "why should we pay for it" be a more appropriate question? American taxpayers are once again forced to foot the bill, and a mammoth bill it is, as the United States spends at least $40 billion a year on costs directly related to the drug war, and then several billion more in indirect costs. The costs of spraying Colombian crops, of hiring numerous DEA and other government employees, of locking up more people on drug charges than all of Western Europe locks up on all charges combined, are astronomical, and these are only the direct costs, What about the welfare dependence that comes from creating a class of people who have drug-related crimes on their records and often cannot obtain employment? The drug war is indeed perpetuating a harrowing cycle for people with drug use or drug sales in their past. For example, let's say you were charged with sales and then were forced to spend some time in jail. Once you served your time and were released from prison, you decide to apply for some jobs. When you fill out employment applications, you are asked whether you have had a criminal record. If you check the yes box, chances are that you won't be the employer's first choice. If you check the no box, you are lying and could get into further trouble if the employer does a background check or finds out that you lied. There are no great options here. Then, because you cannot find a legitimate job, it is difficult to make a living. This makes turning to the sale of drugs an easy and almost sensible option, even if that is not the choice you wanted to make. The point is that when the government locks ordinary people away for committing non-violent, non-victim, harmless drug crimes, it sets people up for repeat offenses. It also makes welfare a very plausible option. Either way, taxpayer money goes to the huge cost of filling prisons or the huge cost of supporting people and their families when the breadwinner is imprisoned or unemployable. And the cycle generally does not end with one person. Children who grow up in houses where their parents are drug dealers, in housing projects, and on welfare generally are not primed to have the brightest futures. They grow up around these things, and this lifestyle becomes normalized and passed on. Whole generations of families grow up around this, and it is unhealthy, dangerous, and expensive. This cycle is detrimental, and the government's holier-than-thou values have been unable to stop it. Why we fight. Yet the drug war keeps going and going and going. Regardless of who is in power, Republican, Democrat, liberal, or conservative, the war on drugs has been happening for 4 decades. Why? Is the government so arrogant and stubborn that it can't look at the statistical information and see that these policies simply do not work? Do politicians just like squandering our money? These questions are still open, but it seems likely that the government knows these policies do not work. It must. Yet politicians lie to us and wax poetic about eliminating the use of drugs because it sounds like a good thing to say from a stump. Well, it's about time they came back down to earth. Politicians like to speak about the war on drugs because combating drugs sounds moral. The people from good families with good morals and good character that we want to represent us in the government feel the need to propagate this squeaky clean image. Advocating for a drug-free society generally helps this image and is something the public wants to hear. Politicians are afraid to veer away from it. The mainstream public is afraid to disagree. Basically, we all waste $40 billion a year to keep up a useless, ineffective appearance. Who's fooled by this charade? Anyone who picks up a newspaper, tabloid, watches TV, or goes on the Internet could tell you that politicians are far from angels. They have affairs, they steal money, they gamble, they drink to excess. Many have even used drugs that they themselves have voted to make illegal. And the truth is, many ordinary American people have used drugs as well. For this is the reason that the war on drugs is such a large enterprise. At its heart, the war on drugs is about false morality and personal freedom. People do risky things every day. Sure, some people are more averse to risk than others, and would never climb a mountain or go bungee jumping. Yet some people love doing these death-defying stunts, and their quality of life would be damaged without doing them. Drugs are not much different. Once you take the government's sense of morality out of the equation and simply look at drugs as dangerous and addictive substances, drugs are really not much different than other risks. So instead of spouting on and on about the morality of this issue, shouldn't politicians take on the cause of freedom? This gets back to the heart of what this book argues. The government lies to us when it tells us the drug war is for our own good, or when it tells us that the war on drugs is working. The government lies to us by covering up what the drug war is actually about: image, power, and usurping the rights of Americans. Anthony Gregory, senior researcher at the Independent Institute, a free market think tank in Oakland, California, eloquently wrote, "The ideology of the war on drugs is the ideology of totalitarianism, of communism, of fascism, and of slavery. In practice, it has made an utter mockery of the rule of law and the often spouted idea that America is the freest country on earth. The United States has one of the highest per capita prison populations in the world, second only to Rwanda, thanks largely to the drug war, all while its federal government imposes its drug policies on other countries by methods ranging from mere diplomatic bullying to spraying foreign crops with lethal poison, from bribing foreign heads of state to bankrolling and whitewashing acts of mass murder conducted by despots in the name of fighting drugs." Reported incidents reveal a gross abuse of police power during drug raids. In Philadelphia, a group of narcotics squad members entered Jose Duran's tobacco shop with guns drawn and then smashed some of the store's surveillance cameras with a metal rod before arresting the owners for selling tiny, empty Ziploc bags, which the officers claimed were drug paraphernalia. After breaking the remaining surveillance cameras, the police stole money from the cash register and handfuls of Zippo lighters. Similar stories about abuse of police power were reported by 7 other small shops in the Philadelphia area. All of these jackbooted raids were apparently led by narcotics officer Jeffrey Kudzik. At least 3 people who formerly acted as informants for Kudzik claimed that the officer would give them cartons of cigarettes that he stole from the stores he raided. In one raided store, officers opened up the refrigerators to drink and take the juice and energy drinks kept inside. No matter who performs actions like this, they are against the law. But people's rights are often trampled with the war on drugs used as a justification. These Philadelphia raids are just a few examples of the government-engineered assaults on our rights through the war on drugs. Several federal civil rights lawsuits were filed against Kudzik and his brother Richard, who was also an officer, other drug squad members, and the city of Philadelphia. As of this writing, the outcomes of the cases have yet